Okay, we're doing this. Hello, my name is Jay Brown. Welcome to Yoga Talks podcast. I've been off for 2 weeks, and when I was last with you, I mentioned that while I was gone, the election was going to happen. Boy, did it happen, didn't it? And I've talked about this on the podcast before, that I have this thing about yoga teachers not trying to sound wise about things that they know not of. Like, just because you're a yoga teacher doesn't mean you have this wisdom that just applies to everything, so you could just speak on all topics from a place of wisdom. I don't think that, like actors trying to talk about politics, yoga teachers really have a place necessarily. Now, some people, they're socially engaged and that's their thing, and that's fine. But just because you're a yoga teacher doesn't mean you have to say something about everything, And I haven't been saying anything about this election because I don't think I have anything to add that you can't get somewhere else in a better way that I'm going to be able to say it. But it has to be mentioned because it does feel like I'm in a different reality than when I last turned on this little recorder to speak with you. And for me personally, where it's hitting most home is just with my dad. You see, my dad voted for the president-elect, and I didn't know that before the election because my dad and I stopped talking about politics together some years ago. Which is a real shame because originally talking about politics was something that brought us together. That after I'd come into my adulthood I really educated myself about politics and the way our government worked, to the extent that I could really hold my own with my dad on a debate about policy. I could speak in an informed way about my position, and my dad really respects that. That's something he always taught us as kids. You have to be able to defend your position. So when I got to a place where I could defend my more progressive position, it kind of became this real commune between us, and we would have lengthy political discussions, and it was lovely. Even they were we didn't agree, they were heated, but there was a lot of love and respect in that heated battle. But I'm remembering that it was somewhere maybe 2 years into the Obama presidency, we stopped trying to have those conversations because at that point they had really divulged, and I felt that they were no longer bringing us together, and in fact those conversations were maybe separating us more, and I didn't want to be separated from my dad any more than I already am. So I stopped engaging that with him. And frankly, we haven't been in much contact because that was the thing that we were doing, and then that became a thing that was no longer bringing us together. So in any case, the day after the election, I got an email from my dad, and it said, "I think I won, but I'm not sure." And I don't know what he was intending when he wrote it. But when I wrote back to him, nobody won. Hatred and fear won the day. God help us. He came back in what I see as a more defensive stance, and he said, hope and change won the day. And my response was, well, look, people may have voted for what they're hoping to be change, but it was certainly not based in hope. You can't get around the sexism and the racism and the hatred. And he responded, I didn't see hatred. I saw honesty and real change. And I don't know what to, I don't understand how someone can look at the same thing that I'm looking at and see it so completely different. I felt that way during the George W. Bush years as well. This is like way more intense where I don't understand. I don't understand. And even if I can get my mind around the possibility that, okay, let's just say my dad is not sexist, he's not racist, that he voted the way he did because he wanted to make a statement. He wanted to say, fuck you. He wanted to disrupt corruption and the bullshit. And I understand that, wanting to disrupt. But in order to do that in this election, you had to acquiesce and ultimately enable sexism, racism, and hatred. So either you're sexist, racist, and full of hatred, or you enabled it. Either way, it's my fucking dad, and I love him. And what do I do with that? What do I do with that? I don't know. I'm betting I'm not the only one who doesn't know what to do. And there's not any silver linings for me right now. I mean, I normally look for silver linings, but today, on the Friday after the election, there's no silver linings. There's nothing good about the situation. But I did have a little bit of some kind of saving grace. Because the day after the election, I had to teach a class Wednesday night, 6:30. And I determined that I was going to go to that class with no expectation that anyone's going to feel better from it. I just went to like hold space to let people be with themselves, to have whatever they might want to have. But I relinquished any feeling in myself that I was going to have to be the one to do it for us because I didn't feel equipped to. That I just needed to try to feel okay inside myself, and I was going to invite other people to do that. And a bunch of people showed up, and one person in particular who I want to give a shout out to, Sharon. She's probably going to be listening to this, and I hadn't met Sharon before, but she's a podcast listener, and there was just something about the way that we looked at each other, so much of what needed to be communicated between us was communicated in an unspoken manner and then in some spoken manner after class. And I just felt, oh, okay, here's my friend, you know. And I came to something super important for me about my yoga practice, which is that what I've gotten from my yoga practice, like the real power of it, it stems from when I had to pull myself out of the worst dismay that I've ever been in. That people have heard me talk about my mom a bunch of times and how that process is what helped me be who I want to be. And I've done that. I have been able to be at my worst and then be who I want to be despite that. And that's when I think yoga practice is its most powerful. Like right now, when everything's totally fucked up. that's when it counts the most. And I feel even a little bit like a renewed sense of purpose because of that. Like more determined to be doing what I'm doing, despite all the crap I've been talking about on the podcast and writing about and all that shit that starts to build up and like weigh on me and make me feel like I can't do it. There's the power in me to say, no, I can do what I can do and I will do that. So that actually makes me feel like a little charge rather than defeated. And I think that's what I'm going to go with. That feels helpful to me. So I'm reaching out to everyone listening and just expressing whatever shared humanity we can feel through the fact that you happen to be listening to this right now. And I'm saying what's in my heart. I do feel like I got to carry on. I want to keep doing the podcast. I got all these awesome talks that I recorded, and today and all the talks from this month really were recorded before the election. And I feel like I should say that, like we should know that the conversation would have probably been different had it been recorded after. But today's talk is with Cyndi Lee from Om Yoga, and it was really a special talk. We did not know each other, but there was just an open feeling that happened in our conversation, and she was so easy to talk to, and I felt very comfortable, and we really talked about some deep history and some important things about yoga center owners and yoga teachers, and for those of you who are listening who are Om Yoga people who were maybe a little bit upset when Om closed, I think that Cyndi Lee speaks to that. And I don't know, I got so much out of this talk, and I'm really excited to share it with you, even in the midst of all the turmoil. But before we listen to that, I have to say one more thing, and it's a shame that the election would be overshadowing this, but for anybody who listened to the last podcast, in the intro, I talked about my eldest daughter and how she had gotten this homework assignment. She's in second grade, and she's in this gifted and talented program, and this one week, the teacher assigned like a lot of homework, and it caused this turmoil in the house. And I made comments about it, and I made a specific comment, which was that it felt like it wasn't about my daughter, that it was about the teacher needing to hit certain scores so she could secure her career and so that the school could get its funding. And I felt like I was coming up against the educational system in the country. Well, you won't believe what happened. I posted that podcast on Monday, and on Thursday, I had my first parent-teacher meeting with my daughter's teacher. And I walked into this meeting with her, and we sit down, and she said, well, first, do you guys have any questions or concerns or any things that you wanted to bring up? And so I had planned to bring it up. I said, well, there was that one week last week where that homework assignment felt like a little bit too much, and it caused a strain. And she said, yes, I listened to your podcast, and actually I was a little bit offended. Oh, you should have seen the look on my wife's face. It was like I was totally busted or something. Like I totally got us in trouble with my daughter's second grade teacher. And there was like an uncomfortable moment, but then I realized, well, wait, no, that's not what I was saying. Like, I understood in the moment what she was upset about. It sounded like I was saying that my daughter's teacher was more concerned with her career than my daughter's education. And that's not what I intended to say. I expressed that to her, but I wanted to make a point of having it be a public clarification and apology. I want to formally apologize to Miss Kender at PS 132 because I think Miss Kender is an amazing teacher. I'm profoundly impressed with her. She has 30 kids in her class. I do not understand how anybody manages that. I've had like 5 or 6 of them at my house at one time, and I'm like, oh my God. So that she does what she does, and she does it incredibly well. She's like really good at what she does, and I recognize that. So when I made those comments, I did not intend to be casting an aspersion on her personally. I was talking like in a more generalized sense of the role of teacher in the system because she is being evaluated. I know that part of that evaluation is an internal evaluation from the administration, which is probably more accurate, but there is also the like the statewide or whatever evaluations, which are score-based. And so it was the system that I was hoping to comment on, not her. So Miss Kender, I'm hoping that you're going to listen to this one too. I just want to say to you, I'm very grateful for what you're doing for my child. I support you. I am here to support you in every way I can. And I apologize if it seemed that I was in any way calling into question your integrity, because that is not what I meant to do. So, lesson learned, my friends. You can't assume that someone's not listening to your podcast. I would have never thought that my daughter's second grade teacher would be listening to this podcast, but she did, which I thought was super cool, and I'm grateful. Thank you, Miss Kender, again. Okay, wow, we got to wrap this up. Just a quick note, I've got some gigs. If you want to come meet me, I'm going to be at Samudra Yoga on December 3rd in Garden City, New York. I'm going to be at Riverstone Yoga in Tarrytown, New York on February 26th. You can check out all my blog and the podcast archives and my online video stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, that's good. Let's get to it. This is a big conversation. Let's talk to Cyndi Lee. Cyndi Lee, hello. It's really cool to talk to you. We don't really know each other. We haven't met so much, but you're certainly someone who's like been a figure in my life. I started yoga in New York City in the like mid 90s. I have a memory of like you practicing next to you at Jivamukti on 2nd Avenue sometime around then. And then you went on to do all the things that you've done, and you certainly laid the stage for someone like me. You know, I have a center in Williamsburg. I'm 9 years in. My lease goes up in a year. And I have a nicer landlord than it sounds like you did.
Yeah.
But, I'm still facing a lot of the same issues, that you faced. And so in any case, I get way ahead of myself, but it's just great to talk to you. So thanks for giving me a bit of your time today.
Oh, it's so fun to, talk with you. And I feel the same. It's like we've been circling around each other in the same community and somehow never really met. So this is great. This is the start.
Yeah. And, we have like a million mutual friends, and I just know so many teachers who came through your training. So great to talk to you.
Yes.
And so, I did a little research to get ready to talk to you. It's like one of the things the podcast has done for me is when I sit down to talk with someone, I get to learn about them. And this may not be news to other people, but it was to me that you choreographed Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun video. Is that's true? And I also read that you're in it, right?
Well, I had a dance company back then, and I had two partners in the company, Mary Ellen Strom and Pierce Turner. And Mary Ellen and I got a lot of gigs doing videos because it was in the 80s and everybody was doing dances. And Pierce Turner, who did the music for our dance company, had a record deal on Sony, and so did Cyndi Lauper. And so they were friends. And she came and sang when we did our dance concert at St. Mark's Church at Dance Space. And so we were friends with her. So she got this great record deal, and they were going to make a video to this song, and she just asked us because she didn't know any other dancers. And so there's one scene where we needed one more person, and so I stepped in. But I think if you played the video really, really slow and looked really, really carefully, you could see me for 1 second. But that's about it.
I mean, I watched the video to see if I could find you. But honestly, there's like so much hair and makeup going on in that video. I even if you could see, I'm not sure we could recognize you.
I think that might be the case, yeah.
Wow, so that's cool. So that explains how you got that gig. And I know you danced in college as well, even prior to getting to New York. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a dance major at UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine. And I got my BFA and my MFA there. And at the end of my graduate school time, I had a mentor as one of my teachers, and she said, why don't you apply to the Whitney Museum, which I'd never even heard of. I'd only ever taken one art class, which I thought was fun, but that was not my world. But I applied and they accepted me. And I think I was kind of a token person to get accepted because they had two programs, and one was studio art and one was museum. And I was in the museum, and legally I belonged in studio. But I was sort of the pet then in the museum. Everybody was from Barnard and Sarah Lawrence and Vassar, and they were pretty buttoned up, and they all became, head curators of important museums. And I just danced on Wednesdays around the art pieces, on performance day, and I danced around, and, but it got me to New York. And I got to have an interview, a meeting with Yvonne Rainer, who was one of my big dance heroes. And, it put me in the world that I wanted to be in. So that was really how I started in New York.
Well, I also heard you talk about in an interview, even just how, like, your dad was a great dancer and you were kind of always dancing as a kid, and that was just something always you did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we danced. We had music in our house. And we also had a really humongous living room because my father was a minister. And so my parents had to give, big open houses and, big parties. And there were only three of us. I'm an only child, but we had this huge, big living room. And so we played music and we danced around the living room all the time. That was my whole growing up. And
you said your dad was a minister?
My dad was a minister, yeah.
And I asked that because I know you kind of say that you became pretty much a hippie. And how did your minister father feel about that?
My parents were extremely cool. They were very liberal. His church denomination is called Disciples of Christ, which sounds kind of like it might be conservative, but it's actually very liberal. And if you see a church somewhere called the First Christian Church of blank, 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 that's a Disciples of Christ church. So, they were marching with Martin Luther King, and my father, helped a lot of boys get their conscientious objector status during the Vietnam War. They were really, very liberal and taught me that way. So it was kind of a natural that, I became a hippie and was drawn to, spiritual seeking in different ways. I didn't fall into the Christian path from the very start. And I told my dad by the time I was in eighth grade, I don't get it. And he was like, okay, that's okay. And we had the most amazing spiritual discussions. And I got deeper into yoga and read, Autobiography of a Yogi and all these kinds of teachings. We had great discussions, and he went to see the Dalai Lama with me, and he met my guru, Galak Rinpoche, and he said, it's all the same stuff. It's love and compassion.
Wow, I mean, that's beautiful. I know that it happened a little bit later for me. I remember when I was 16 being taken to High Holy Day services at the temple and realizing that I had all these prayers memorized in Hebrew. I was like a really good student, but when I looked at the translations of what they meant, I didn't feel like I believed in it. And I told my dad, I said, I don't believe in this, Dad, and I don't know if I can come to temple anymore. And he said, look, I don't know how much I believe in it either, but your mom does, and you're going to go for her. And when it was that, when I didn't have to believe it, but it was just like for my mom, I was cool with that. That was fine.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much the same for me. My father his star was rising as a minister, and he had opportunities. He had a big church. We lived in Seattle, Washington. He had a big downtown church, but he had other opportunities to move up in the hierarchy of the church. And I knew that they were not going to do that until I graduated from high school, because they didn't want me to have to leave my school. And so I just felt like I'm going to go to church. I'm going to be nice. And because I love them and I think they're great people. But I didn't really have a problem with the church. I just didn't know who they were talking to when they said our Heavenly Father and things like that. I was just like, I don't relate to that. I don't get it. So, it's still a good community, and, it was okay.
It seems interesting to me also that you mentioned already, like, you took a turn towards like a Eastern spirituality direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I noted that your graduate thesis from college was called Women's Spirituality in Indian Dance.
You really did your research. Wow.
So it seemed like you were already kind of looking in those directions even back then, right?
Yeah, I went to college in 1971, and I was just 18, just turned 18, and pretty much right away I became a vegetarian, and then I took yoga because they had yoga in this school, in this college, and I was terrible at team sports. I'm still like, I don't like to play a game where somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. That just isn't fun for me. Mm-hmm. So they had yoga, and you were required to take a PE class. So I took this yoga class, and when I look back on it now, I was telling my husband, who's a college president, and he said, you would never have a yoga teacher like this in a college these days. But my teacher was a real yogi. We didn't just do asana. We were reading books. We were doing kriyas. We were doing fasts. We went on a retreat in the winter to Joshua Tree Desert and had a silent retreat. I mean, he was really teaching us yoga. And I really, resonated with it and just kind of kept doing it.
Mm-hmm. Those early seeds get planted, right?
Yeah. And it was just really, really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And there was never anything that I read in it. Like I read Autobiography of a Yogi. I was working at the Capizio store part-time, and there was another one there who was my age, and we were friends, and we used to exchange books. And so I said, you got to read this book. It's so great. So she takes it, and she comes back to me like a couple weeks later and says, this is the stupidest book ever. You don't believe this stuff, do you? And I was shocked because it never occurred to me not to believe it. Mm-hmm. We read about Babaji and, astro traveling, and that Yogananda had this experience where he came out of his body and he could see everything all at once. I just thought, I don't know, I can't say it made sense to me, but it didn't not make sense to me. It was like, sure,
Well, I had a similar experience, but my book was a different book. It was called 14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy. And it's this like Theosophical Society kind of book and it talked about some of those things. And I just remember the first time I read it, something in me just sort of resonated and thought, oh, this feels like truth to me.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just like some part of you that gravitates towards those ideas.
Yeah, I believe this. I mean, I didn't even think, do I believe it or not believe it? I just kept reading it and thinking about it and practicing. And
right.
I also when I was still in California, in Southern California, I was in a dance company, and there was a woman in the dance company who had been married at the Self-Realization Fellowship in LA. Uh-huh. So she knew all the chants, and so we used to go there all the time and hang out and walk through the grounds and do the chants from Yogananda.
Get some realization going on, huh?
Yeah, and it was just very harmonious, and it didn't seem weird in any way.
Yeah.
It was Southern California in the 70s, so.
All right, so then you get to New York, and you're like the hippie chick at the Whitney.
Yeah, it was so funny. I walked in to the very first meeting of all of the interns that had gotten this grant, and I think there was about 10 people. And they were all sitting in a circle, and I was a little bit late because I'd only moved to New York 2 days before, and I kind of got lost getting there. And I walked in, and I had long hair down to my waist that was wavy, big and wavy, like Janis Joplin. And I had a dress that I made out of vintage flowery fabric that was also kind of like wavy all the way to the floor, Birkenstocks and hairy armpits. And I walked in, and they said, oh, you must be the girl from California. And I thought, how did they know that? And really, I wondered that until about a couple of years ago, when all of a sudden it was like, duh.
Mm-hmm. I remember my freshman year being like some English class and like making some comment, and the teacher commenting, oh, maybe that's the way it is in LA or something, and being like, well, why do they know I'm from LA? And then later I look at it like, of course, the way you grow up, it's like all over you, different vibes for different places.
Yeah. And I think New York is, once I became a New Yorker, really, through and through,
Mm-hmm.
I did the same thing. Oh, you must be from California.
Of course, you could tell. Well, so when you got to New York, did you start taking yoga classes? Did you find yoga in New York?
No, I found yoga, but it was because I was doing this fellowship, and it paid something like $60 every 2 weeks, I think. So I had to get a job, and so I got a job teaching yoga at the Apple Health Club. Back then, there were two health clubs. There was the New York Rocket Club, and there was this little place on Thompson Street in the Village called Apple. Mm-hmm. I got a job there. I don't know. I think a friend had a job there, and she got me a job there, another dancer. And I talked them into having yoga classes. And I got Richard Hiddleman's, Yoga in 21 Days. And I got Shivananda's book. And, I just got a bunch of books. And I read them, and I studied them, and I made up how to teach a yoga class based on what I remembered from my teacher. And then I never stopped teaching yoga since then.
Wow. So you never took classes first, you just started teaching?
Well, I took classes in college.
Oh, right. You had classes in college, but like in New York, you didn't get into the scene, you just started doing your own thing right away. Yeah.
And I think there might not have been that much yoga back then.
Yeah, well, so I'm sorry for a second. I know you have a teacher, Galek Rinpoche, yeah. And did you meet your teacher before you came to New York?
No, I met Rinpoche in the late 80s.
Okay.
And he's not a yoga teacher.
No.
He's Tibetan Lama.
Right. So, wow. So then when did you start teaching yoga in New York, in like 73 or something like that? Is that what we're talking about? 78. All right.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of yoga going on at that time. Like,
I'm going to guess that, Integral was there, probably, and maybe like Shivananda.
Was like Dharma Mitra around?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. And I know that Swami Bua was there teaching classes.
All right. But you just started teaching classes and just made it as you went along.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. And so
I think there's another element to just include in that, though, which is that when you get a Master of Fine Arts in Dance from the University of California, Irvine, and at that time, the head of the department was Eugene Loring, who's one of the great reformers of American ballet. And he made a very famous ballet called Billy the Kid to Aaron Copland music, and it was a big deal. And he was the head of the department, and he took me under his wing. And so I learned how to choreograph, and I also learned how to teach. We really learned how to teach. This is beginner ballet. This is intermediate. This is level 3. We learned how to teach movement, modern dance, ballet, all of it. So
that early class that you taught, what did it look like? Was it like a vinyasa class, or like was it more like, what did it look like?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? It's too long ago.
It was too long ago. I do remember that I did the class with them, which I would not do now. And I remember that we didn't have any props, and we did shoulder stand. And, I was like 26 or something, and I could just do everything. And I did a shoulder stand, and I remember watching the clock and going, I think I can do this for like 10 minutes. Of course, you would never do that in a gym class, a 10-minute shoulder stand without a blanket or anything.
Right.
But I did it. And
well, I'm curious, did you have any kind of like spiritual components that you were having? Because it was before you had your Buddhist teacher. So were you incorporating that, or was it more of just like a movement thing?
I was already meditating. Mm-hmm. And I had taken TM training, and I had a mantra. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably it.
And so how did you end up getting to your Buddhist studies?
So this was my side gig. Yoga was my side gig. And I started dancing. And through dance, I met, I can't even remember, but, eventually I met this friend, Candy Jernigan. And Candy Jernigan was a really amazing visual artist. And she used to do things like draw a picture of someone, and you could see inside their stomach. And she would ask people, what did you have for dinner? And then she would put it in their stomach and then draw it on it was really interesting. And so she saw Philip Glass on an airplane, and she went up and sat next to him and said, I do this. Can I draw a picture of you and say what? And she would take scrapings of the food and put it on the paper, and it was really cool.
Okay.
It was kind of natural history drawings, only, different. And so anyway, I became friends with Philip Glass. And Philip Glass was studying with Swami Bua for a long time. And we started going on vacations together with a group of friends. And Phil had this big camp, sort of, with lots of little cabins and stuff. So lots of people could go up there, and it was really fun and creative. And he said, I do yoga every morning if anybody wants to get up with me. And I was the only one that did. So we started doing yoga together. And he would tell me about Swami Bua, but he would also tell me about Gelek Rinpoche. And then Candy got sick and died. Just got sick, liver cancer, died. And Gelek Rinpoche came and said prayers and did services. And at that point, I was, obviously in emotional distress because my best friend just died. And so I started reading Dharma books. And then I asked Rinpoche what I should do. And he gave me a practice, which I started doing, a kind of prayer. And then Philip said, did Rinpoche give you refuge? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, show me what he gave you. And I showed it to him, and he said, you just took refuge with Gelek Rinpoche, and that's a really big deal. So I took refuge with Gelek Rinpoche, and he's been my root guru ever since then.
Well, it certainly seems like that shaped your direction thereafter.
The other thing was that Phil, I continued dancing for a while, and for quite a while after that. And Philip really supported me in that, and helped and let me use some of his music sometimes and different things like that. But also Allen Ginsberg was in that same Sangha, and he was very close to Gelek Rinpoche.
Well, I noticed that. You see how you jumped right to where I was going to go, because I noticed that, your last concert was called Dharma Dances.
Yeah.
And Allen Ginsberg was in it.
Yeah. So, Allen Ginsberg was in it, and he most people don't know this about him, but he's written a lot of songs, and they're all Dharma songs, and they're really great. And he, I screwed up my courage, and I asked him if I could use them and choreograph to them. And so I got recordings of them from his secretary, and then I said, would you do it live? And he did, and it was amazing, and we became friends. And so I had met Alan a little bit, and I knew Philip, and they were both so kind and so generous and so supportive to young artists like me. And I thought, I'll have what they're having, and what they were having was Gelek Rinpoche and these teachings. And this is exactly how you're supposed to pick a teacher, I found out later. You look at who the followers are of the teacher, and are they kind? Are they helpful? Are they clear? Are they confused? Are they cliquey? Are they, kind of a weird entourage that seems, unhealthy? What's going on? And they were how I wanted to be. I aspired to be like them, not just as successful artists, but as human beings. And so that's really why I started with Gelek Rinpoche. And
then you parted from the dance world.
Well, I danced for almost 20 years.
Right.
But you
moved in a different direction and stopped making dances. That was your last one. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I was getting sick of it. It, on the one hand, looking back, I can see that the 80s was the heyday of dance.
Mm-hmm.
It was so alive. And I'm so happy and grateful that I was there. I was in that at that time. It was just a blast, really,
Mm-hmm.
But nobody had any money. It didn't matter. We were just wildly creative. We sewed our own costumes. We cut our own hair. We thought we could do everything except make shoes.
Well, I'm asking so much about this because I was in a little bit of a dance world, but the next generation after. You guys were all our teachers in school,
Mm-hmm.
and I made dances out of college for a while, and then just really became disenchanted with it. It was such a hard road to plow, the no money and trying to make these things, and at some point I was making all these dances that are about how much I hated the dance world. And somebody was like, why are you making dances? And I was like, I don't know. And so I stopped, but I relate that at some point also, like, yoga started to feel like more the direction I wanted to go in, rather than like the performative dance arts or whatever.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like the last concert I was doing, I was dancing on the first night, looking in the audience to see if the important people were there. And I remember going out with my girlfriend afterwards and going, I'm done. I used to dance because I love moving, and this is different. So I stopped.
Right.
And then I started going to Jiva Mukti.
Well, see, that's exactly when I remember practicing next to you. So you started practicing in Jiva Mukti, and were you studying with Sharon David?
Well, actually, here's a good story. I was teaching aerobics at Crunch on 13th Street. And I guess I went into an empty studio one day to practice something, or I don't know, make up a dance or whatever I was doing. And it was playing Jimi Hendrix and kind of dancing around. And Sharon Gannon came in to teach her class. And she said, oh, Jimi Hendrix, he's from my hometown. And I said, he's from my hometown. And we were like, oh, we're both from Seattle. And then we discovered that we both went to the same high school at the same time. She's 2 years older than me, and it was a 3-year high school. So for 1 year, we were both there at the same time. And so I started taking her yoga class. And then she gave me a free pass to go to Jiva Mukti, and, the rest is history.
I see. And did you just practice there? Or did you ever teach there?
I practiced there and I taught there. There was 1 year when Sharon and David did an invitation-only teacher training.
Uh-huh.
They did it for free, and there was about 6 people in it.
Was Kachi in that?
No, Kachi was already teaching.
Okay.
Carrie Bond was in it, and Lilia Mead was in it.
Okay. I talked to Lilia Mead. She mentioned that training. That's right.
And Lilia and I have been friends ever since then.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now she's in LA. She's on the West Coast now.
She is?
Yeah, she moved. You don't know if you know that. She closed Go Down and she moved to the West Coast. She's having a great time.
Wow.
She blew this taco stand.
Well, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you were practicing, and then you started teaching at Jiva Mukti too.
Mm-hmm.
But then at some point, I mean, you opened Om and you left doing that, right?
I left Jiva Mukti because then they changed their policy, and they decided that everyone that taught there needed to take their full-on teacher training, and they were requiring that. And I didn't want to take that teacher training because it was very Hindu-based, and that wasn't. I was already, deep into working with Galak Rinpoche, and I just felt like it wasn't.
But the first training you did wasn't Hindu-based?
It was, it was less in depth, I think,
They were just trying stuff out.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, we learned a lot about teaching. Mm-hmm. We learned a lot about teaching, and we observed classes, and we got to practice teaching, and we got feedback, and it was really, really great in that way. And we did have to go to Kirtan once a month, which I dragged my heels to.
I see, because you already had a deep Buddhist rooted.
Yeah.
You had a teacher, and that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not like I think it's icky or anything. It just, it's not my thing. That's all.
But it also does seem like that practice had some influence. Like the Om practice is like it has a similar vinyasa style to it, but it just had that different philosophical underpinning to it.
Yes, I think that it's definitely very influenced by Jivamukti, but I think it's also influenced by Iyengar, as we have a lot of emphasis on alignment. And in my memory, because it's been a while since I've done a Jivamukti class, but I think we go a little slower. And it's interesting to me, Jason, that your thing is something like gentle is the new advanced.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that a lot. And when I first started Om, I didn't know how to say what it was, but I knew how to say what it wasn't. And one thing that I wanted it to not be, and the practice, which was kind of organically coming out of me that I was sharing, was it's vinyasa, but it's not super fast and it's not super intense. So like sitting up really straight and making Yana Mudra with really straight arms and kind of being rigid and truly arrogant is what it felt like to me.
Well, that's very interesting to me because what that says to me, it's something I've always thought about is even if we used the same forms, like your sensibility as a person and like the kind of philosophy that you embrace, it comes through in your teaching of those forms. So you could probably teach the same sequence.
Right.
And have one feel a little bit more rigid or harder and one feel a little bit more gentle, the same sequence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think my sequencing is the same, but I think that there's some structural, overall structure to a class that is similar. Right. Although my things evolved over the years as well. But I was really, in a middle path. That's a big Buddhist ideas, middle path. Can you be engaged? It's so yogic too, right? Can you be engaged and present and bright and observant and yet be spacious and relaxed and grounded?
Absolutely. And sthira sukha, that's it, right?
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's totally brings me to a question I have because I've heard you say something around this time, like then you opened Om, and it was really, I don't know, you ushered in the boom time, it seems to me. Like you got in right at the right time, as far as I can tell.
Totally.
And you've attributed the boom of like yoga centers to gyms starting to have yoga classes. And I always kind of thought it was the other way around. I always thought that like Ashtanga hit and then there was lots more yoga happening and the gyms sort of saw, hey man, yoga's a thing, and then they jumped on the bandwagon. But you seem to think that the gyms emboldened people to open centers. Could you say something about that?
Well, I think, it's cyclical. And maybe because you came a little bit later than me, that we're both right.
Yeah.
Because there weren't very many yoga studios back then. There was Jivamukti, Shivananda, Integral, Dharma Mitra, Urban Yoga, which I also taught at, that is no longer. And, there was a World Yoga up on the Upper West Side, and not maybe 20 yoga studios, maybe not even 20. I think not even 20. And when I left New York, there was something like 300. So there was yoga in all the gyms, and I taught in all those gyms, back then. And so there was an interest. And what Sharon did, which was so brilliant, was she taught at Crunch when she had a yoga studio. And she saw people who were into it and gave them free passes. And then they went to Jivamukti, where the classes were better because there's props and there's levels and,
There was no compete clauses, huh?
Yeah, not to herself. So, I think it felt like the interest in yoga grew and that a lot of people had a similar experience to me, which was I really liked this class with Sharon at the gym. And of course I could take it for free because I worked at that gym, but I'm willing to pay and go to Jivamukti because
it was cool. It was a cool place.
It was super cool. It was so much fun.
I loved going to Jivamukti. I really loved that place. It was great.
I went there every day, more than once a day, often, because I lived on 8th Street and 2nd Avenue. I lived right around the corner. But But yeah, it was really cool, and you could really learn a lot more about yoga than you can learn in the other classes. So I thought maybe a lot of people had that same experience where they got the taste of it and then they wanted to learn more.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.